He served the city for 14 years without scandal, until white officers pulled him over in his own neighborhood, ignored his badge, and cuffed him in front of his son. He sued. And what came next shook the whole department. Sergeant Terence Miles had been with the department for nearly 15 years. He wasn't a desk cop. He was out there every day. Community patrol, homicide scenes, missing persons, the works. He knew the neighborhoods, the families, even the corner kids who'd give him a nod when he rolled by. He'd built trust the hard way. But on a chilly Thursday night just past 10 p.m., none of that mattered. Terence was off duty, heading home from a 14-hour shift that ended in paperwork and back pain. He drove a modest grey Ford Edge, one of those cars you forget as soon as it passes. No dark tints, no rims, no broken lights. He was in plain clothes, sweatshirt, jeans, badge tucked into his back pocket. The streets were quiet. Just a few blocks from home, he was thinking about heating up leftovers and kissing his wife, Simone, goodnight. That's when the flashing lights hit his rearview mirror. He pulled over, calm but confused. He didn't recognize the patrol car behind him. His first thought? Maybe he had a tail light out. Second thought? That sharp, trained instinct that told him something wasn't right. Before he could reach for his license, 2 more squad cars boxed him in, front and behind. Terence exhaled slowly, rolled down his window, and kept both hands on the steering wheel, just like he'd told so many young black men to do over the years. Keep your hands visible. Stay calm. Don't argue. One officer approached from the driver's side, hand already hovering over his holster. The other crept along the passenger side with his weapon drawn low, but ready. They didn't ask for license or registration. "Step out of the vehicle," the first one barked. "Officer," Terence began, his voice steady. "I'm Sergeant Miles, badge number 4138. I'm off duty. You're making a mistake." But the gun was already aimed squarely at his chest. "Out of the car. Now." No time to argue. Terence moved slow, opened the door, and stepped out. As soon as he did, they grabbed his arms, shoved him toward the hood of his SUV, and cuffed him. The metal bit into his wrists. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. All he could do was stare at the cracked sidewalk, silently praying that his son wasn't watching from the window. He wasn't read his rights. No questions were asked, just a lot of short commands, tension, and cold silence. His badge? Still in his back pocket. They never checked. More officers arrived. A 4th car. Then a 5th. A small crowd formed, neighbors peeking from porches, one woman recording with her phone. Terence saw his neighbor, Mr. Jacobs, staring from behind his front door curtain, wide-eyed and confused. Jacobs had lived next to Terence for over a decade. Then he heard it. "Dad?" It was Caleb, his 14-year-old son, standing on the curb, wearing socks and a hoodie, face lit by the patrol car's flashing lights. Simone must have sent him after hearing the noise. Terence turned slightly, enough to meet his son's eyes. "It's okay, Caleb," he called out, voice calm but forced. "Go back inside." One of the officers yelled at the boy to move back. That was the moment something cracked in Terence's chest. Not from pain, not even from fear, from humiliation, not for being stopped, but for being reduced to nothing in front of his own child. The next 10 minutes were a blur. Eventually, a supervisor arrived. A tall white lieutenant with a receding hairline, who clearly recognized Terence the moment he stepped out of the car. "Miles?" he said, jaw tightening. He walked straight over to the arresting officers. Voices were lowered. No apologies were made. They uncuffed him. "Misunderstanding," was all they offered. The same old word. No mention of what fit the description. No explanation of why 5 squad cars were needed. No report. Just a vague nod from the supervisor and a, "You're free to go." Terence rubbed his wrists. They still burned. He looked around. His neighbors watched silently. Caleb was gone. Simone must have pulled him inside. The officers turned back to their cruisers. One of them, the younger cop with the beard, avoided eye contact. The other one didn't care. No remorse. No fear of consequences. It was like it never happened. Terence climbed back into his car, closed the door, and just sat there, 14 years wearing the badge. But tonight, to them, he was just another black man in a grey SUV, and for the first time in his career, he wasn't sure which side he belonged to anymore. Terence didn't sleep that night. He sat at the edge of his bed, still wearing the same clothes from the incident. Simone had tried talking to him, gently asking what happened, but he'd only shaken his head and said, "I just need a minute." That minute stretched into hours. The house was quiet, but his mind was loud. Too loud. He kept replaying the moment Caleb called out, "Dad?" That voice. Small, worried, exposed. Terence had responded like he always had during tense calls. Calmly, professionally, in control. But it wasn't a call. This was his street. His home. His son. And he'd been treated like a threat. In front of everyone. At around 3 a.m., Simone returned to the bedroom holding a cup of tea. She didn't say much. She just handed it to him and sat beside him on the bed. After a long silence, she finally whispered, "What did they say to you?" He swallowed hard. "They said I matched a description." Simone's face hardened. "They didn't check your ID? They didn't care who I was?" She stared at him, then at his wrists. The skin was still red where the cuffs had dug in. She reached out to touch the marks, but he pulled away slightly. Not out of anger, but out of shame. The moment still felt too raw, too close. Simone's voice cracked. "Caleb's been asking questions. He saw it all. He asked me why the other cops did that to his father. What am I supposed to say, Terence?" He closed his eyes. "I don't know." There was a long pause between them. Then Simone said what he'd been trying not to hear. "Baby, you have to report this." But Terence shook his head immediately. "To who, Simone? Internal Affairs? You think they don't already know? This stuff. It doesn't get cleaned up. It gets buried, quietly." Her eyes narrowed. "You didn't do anything wrong. I did everything right. That didn't matter." That silence returned. Simone didn't push again. She just sat with him, letting him breathe. Later that morning, Terence got dressed for his shift. He wasn't ready, but he also wasn't the kind of man who called out. Not for anything. When he arrived at the precinct, everything felt normal on the surface. But something was off. People avoided his eyes. Some gave awkward nods, others pretended not to see him. A few junior officers offered fake smiles, like they were unsure which side to stand on. And then there were the whispers, too quiet to hear, too loud to ignore. He sat at his desk and booted up his computer, but his mind was still on the night before. So much had happened in just a few minutes, but what hurt most wasn't the guns, or the cuffs, or even the officer's aggression. It was the fact that no one stepped in. No one questioned it. Even when the lieutenant showed up, even when they realized who he was, there were no apologies. No pause, just the machinery moving on, pretending nothing happened. Later that day, he bumped into Officer Collins, a white cop he'd mentored years ago. Collins looked uncomfortable, like he'd been holding something in all day. "Hey, Sarge," Collins said, glancing around. I heard what happened. You good?" Terence nodded. "Yeah." "They said it was a misunderstanding." Terence didn't answer. Collins rubbed the back of his neck. "I mean, they thought you were someone else, right?" Still no response. "I'm just saying. These things happen, you know? People get tense on night patrol." Terence looked him dead in the eye. "How many plainclothes officers do you know that get pulled out of their cars at gunpoint in their own neighborhood?" Collins didn't reply. He gave a short, nervous nod and walked away. That was it. Later, Terence sat in his patrol car, parked under a tree near one of the local schools. A familiar route. Familiar faces. But everything felt different now. Each glance from a civilian felt loaded. Were they wondering if he was one of the good ones? Were they remembering the video? Did they know it was him? He wasn't just humiliated. He was exposed. His son had seen it. His neighbors had seen it. Now he had to carry it and pretend it didn't happen every time he put that uniform back on. For the first time in his career, the badge on his chest didn't feel like armor. It felt like a contradiction. By the third day, the incident still hadn't left Terence's mind. He could hear it in Caleb's quietness, see it in Simone's sideways glances. Even at work, it lingered in the air. Unsaid but undeniable. Every conversation felt clipped, every gesture measured. The department had already moved on, but Terence hadn't. He sat in the kitchen that Sunday morning, sipping coffee he hadn't tasted, scrolling through his phone. Nothing in the news, no report, no mention. Of course not. That kind of thing doesn't get logged. Not unless someone forces it, not unless you fight. Simone was washing dishes behind him. At one point she said without turning around, "You gonna let it slide?" He didn't answer. She turned off the water and faced him. "I mean it, T. You've let stuff go before. You've let people talk slick, walk past you like you're invisible. But this isn't that." He set the mug down. "I know," he said. "Then what are you waiting for?" He looked at her, eyes tired. "I'm waiting to not be angry. I can't walk into IA full of heat. That's how they twist your words." She nodded slowly. "Fair. But Caleb's watching you. Right now, he's learning what to do when someone violates your dignity in front of your family." That hit harder than he expected. Later that day, Terence pulled out his department-issued laptop. He didn't want to go the internal route. He knew how those ended. "We'll investigate," they'd say. "We take these matters seriously." Then, a month later, a polite letter saying there was insufficient evidence to support disciplinary action. But this wasn't just about policy. It was about principle. So he opened his contacts and sent a quiet message to an old friend, Danielle Sharp, now working in dispatch. He kept it short. "Need to know the call details from Thursday night. Greyford Edge, 10 p.m. Quiet ask?" She responded 5 minutes later. "On it. You okay?" "Not really." An hour later, Danielle sent the file. No stolen vehicle report, no armed suspect in the area. The call was a vague 911 tip about a suspicious person sitting in a car for too long. No color, no make, no plate. Nothing about a weapon. And the caller didn't stay on the line. That's when Terence knew. They saw a black man in a hoodie sitting in an SUV at night. That was it. That's all it took. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen, fists clenched. 14 years in uniform. Letters of commendation. One of the few black sergeants in the district. Still not enough. The next morning, Terence drove back to the spot where it happened. He sat in the exact same place on the curb, engine off, windows down. He watched the street. Kids riding bikes, a woman walking her dog, the neighbor across the way watering her lawn. It didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a stage, like something terrible had happened here, and no one wanted to name it. He turned his head slowly, and noticed Mr. Jacobs, the elderly man from next door, approach his car. "You good, son?" Jacobs asked, his voice low. Terence nodded. "Trying to be." Jacobs rested his hand on the edge of the car. "We saw the whole thing. I was ready to come outside, but Simone waved me off, said she didn't want it to get worse." Terence gave a sad smile. She was right. Jacobs nodded. Then, after a pause, he added, "You handled it better than I would have, but don't let them bury it." Terence looked at him, surprised. "You think I should file?" Jacobs leaned in slightly. "You know what I think? I think people forget that black men in uniform are still black men. They see the badge, but it doesn't cancel out the skin. You can serve all your life, but the second you're not in full gear, you're fair game again." He stepped back, gave a slow nod, and walked away. That was the push Terence needed. That night, he sat down with Simone and Caleb. He told them everything, every word, every moment, how it felt. Caleb listened carefully, nodding, eyes wide but steady. When Terence finished, his son said, "So, you're gonna fight back?" Terence looked at him. "Yeah, I am." Then he added, more for himself than anyone else, "Because if I don't, they'll do it again. To someone else. Maybe to you. Someday." Simone placed her hand over his. No more words needed. It was time to take this out of the shadows. By Monday morning, Terence was in a different headspace. He wasn't just hurt anymore. He was focused. The printout Danielle sent him sat folded neatly in his breast pocket. He kept reading the same line over and over again. Caller described a suspicious individual sitting in a vehicle. No mention of weapons or vehicle make, model. That one line stripped away any excuses the officers might have had. There was no description to match, no probable cause, no justification, just fear and assumption. And those assumptions had been loaded into a holster. Terence decided he wasn't going through the usual channels. Not with this. The department's internal affairs team had a reputation: polite, procedural, and ultimately toothless. He knew too many good complaints that vanished without explanation. Officers got counseled, then got promoted. So instead, he called someone outside the system, Maya Benton. They'd crossed paths years ago when she was working civil rights cases in Chicago. She was sharp, relentless, and knew the law like it was oxygen. These days, she had her own small practice, tight team, high-profile cases, and a reputation for taking on police misconduct with surgical precision. He called her at noon. "Terence Miles," she said, picking up after one ring. "Didn't expect to hear from you. I need help," he replied plainly. She paused. "Tell me everything." They met that same afternoon at her office, a narrow brick building in Bronzeville with a glass door and no receptionist. Maya sat him down, listened carefully, taking notes the old-fashioned way, with a pen and paper. When he was done, she tapped her pen on the desk. "Do you have the dispatch record?" Terence slid the paper across the table. She scanned it, nodded. "And you have your badge ID? Proof of who you are?" "In triplicate," he said. Maya leaned back. "Terence, this is solid. They didn't just mess up. They violated your civil rights. They escalated a non-existent situation with force, and the body cam footage, if it exists, will show exactly how fast they jumped the gun." "I don't want a payout," he said. "I want accountability. Then we file," Maya said. "Not just against the officers, Kessler and Brooke, right? But the department, too. Failure to supervise. Pattern of behavior. You're not the first black man they've done this to." She paused. "You're just the first with a badge." It hit Terence in the gut. Because it was true. He signed the preliminary paperwork right there. The official filing would come within days. By Wednesday, word had already spread. Maya hadn't even gone public yet, but somehow the department caught wind. He felt it immediately. The cold shoulders turned into dead silence. His locker was moved without notice. Someone took down the framed commendation that had hung in the hallway near the squad room. He'd received it after rescuing 2 kids during a fire 5 years earlier. The message was clear. "You're not one of us anymore." At lunch, he sat alone. When he walked into the briefing room for roll call, the chatter stopped. Only one officer, Detective Kevin Wu, offered a nod. Everyone else looked through him. Then came the retaliation in the field. On a domestic call, he requested backup after a volatile suspect fled the scene. No one responded. He radioed again. Still nothing. He handled it alone, calmly, professionally, but he knew what was happening. That night, he called Maya, told her everything. She didn't sound surprised. "They're testing you, trying to scare you back into silence. They're playing with my safety," he said. "And if anything happens," she replied, "it only strengthens the case." But that didn't comfort him. The uniform that once gave him access, protection, and respect had turned into a target. The badge still clipped to his chest didn't mean trust anymore. It meant betrayal. When he got home, Simone was waiting at the door. She'd seen the look in his eyes before, after tough cases, after funerals. But this was different. This wasn't grief. This was rage carefully held in place. She pulled him into the house and locked the door behind them. "They're trying to break you," she said softly. "I know. Don't let them." "I won't." He kissed her forehead, walked to Caleb's room, and knocked gently. "Come in," the boy said. Terence peeked in. "You good?" Caleb nodded. "Yeah, just doing math." Terence sat at the edge of the bed. He didn't talk about lawsuits or retaliation. He just looked at his son and said, "If someone ever does you wrong, don't let silence make it worse. Do the hard thing, even if you're scared." Caleb didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I'm proud of you, Dad." Terence swallowed hard. "Thanks, kid." The fight had started. It wasn't about headlines or a courtroom win. It was about telling the truth, loudly, publicly, because too many men before him had kept it buried. By the end of the week, Terence couldn't ignore it anymore. He was being iced out from every direction. It wasn't just stares or silence now. It was procedural. He noticed his name suddenly removed from a leadership rotation he'd been scheduled for months. A patrol shift reassigned without notice. Cases that used to be passed to him were now rerouted to junior officers with less experience. His inbox was empty. No memos, no updates, no CCs. It was as if he'd been erased. But he was still showing up. Still early, still sharp, still dressed like the veteran he was. If they wanted to push him out, they'd have to make it obvious. At least that's what he told himself. On Tuesday morning, Terence arrived at his desk to find his locker door hanging open. Someone had pried it loose. Inside, his uniform shirt was crumpled on the floor and a piece of paper sat on the top shelf. It was a printout of a gorilla, arms crossed, looking aggressive, with the words, "You still one of us?" scribbled in black marker. Terence stared at it for a long time. He didn't speak, didn't flinch. He folded the image, tucked it into his jacket pocket, and closed the locker. Then he walked to the captain's office. Captain Loring was a stiff, older man with a politician's smile. Terence had worked under him for 6 years. They were never close, but there was mutual respect. At least until now. "I want to file an internal report," Terence said. Loring looked up from his computer. "About what?" He pulled the paper from his pocket and laid it on the desk. Loring blinked, then leaned forward slowly. "Where did this come from?" "My locker. This morning." Loring sat back, fingers steepled. "That's unacceptable. I'll look into it." Terence didn't blink. "You won't find anything unless you actually look." Loring's face tightened. "I know you're going through a lot, Sergeant, but maybe take a few days off. Let things cool. That's not what I need." "Well," Loring said with a measured tone, "maybe it's what the department needs." There it was. The threat. Soft, quiet, and dangerous. That evening, Terence stood in the hallway of his house, staring at his reflection in the mirror near the front door. He touched the badge clipped to his belt. For the first time, he thought about taking it off. Just setting it down. Walking away. But he didn't. Simone stepped out of the kitchen. "What happened?" He handed her the folded image. She looked at it, lips pressing together. "I reported it. Nothing will happen." She leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "They want you out." He nodded. "But you're not going anywhere," she said. "No," he replied. "Not yet." Later that night, he got a call from Maya. Her voice was calm, but there was something new in her tone. Urgency. "We just got notice. Kessler and Brooke have retained union attorneys. Their statements are sealed." Terence exhaled slowly. "Of course. We filed an official civil complaint today. You'll likely be contacted by the press soon." "I'm not hiding." "I know, but you should be ready. They'll try to paint this as a misunderstanding. Say you're playing the race card. Say you're emotional. Anything to distract from the facts." Terence let the words settle. "Let them talk." He hung up and went to the living room. Caleb was on the couch, headphones on, watching a YouTube video. Terence sat beside him, not saying anything at first. After a while, Caleb pulled one earbud out and said, "You okay?" Terence gave a slow nod. "Yeah, just... things are heating up." Caleb nodded like he understood more than he should. Then he said, "Some kids at school were talking about it. They didn't know it was you, but I did." Terence looked over at him. "What did you say?" "I didn't say anything, but it made me mad." Terence nodded. "Me too." The next day, when he got back to work, there was a sticky note on his desk. No name, no handwriting he recognized. It read, "You're making us all look bad." He peeled it off slowly and dropped it in the trash. The retaliation wasn't loud. That's what made it dangerous. It wasn't some grand act of violence. It was the quiet erasure, the looks, the paperwork, the reassignment, the The slow suffocation. They weren't trying to punish him. They were trying to erase him. But Terence Miles wasn't going quietly. The lawsuit was filed on a crisp Thursday morning. Nothing dramatic, just a digital stamp on a federal court docket. No flashing lights, no cameras outside the courthouse, just a PDF uploaded to the Northern District of Illinois, formally naming officers Evan Kessler and Daniel Brooke, and the department itself, as defendants in a civil rights complaint. Terence read the opening line 3 times. This action arises from a blatant act of racial profiling committed against Sergeant Terence Miles, a decorated black police officer. It didn't feel real at first. Seeing his name in legal print, framed as the victim. All his life, he'd been the one writing reports, not the one they were about. But now, there was no turning back. That same afternoon, Maya called him with updates. "We've submitted a formal request for body cam footage. We'll also subpoena radio traffic between the responding officers and dispatch. Once we get it, we'll know if they were freelancing." "They were," Terence said without hesitation. No one gave them a reason to act like that. They just did. Maya was already steps ahead. "I'm filing a motion to preserve all digital communications from that night. Text messages, GPS logs, dashcam video. If they delete anything, we'll hit them for obstruction." For once, Terence felt like someone was in his corner. Not just standing next to him, but pushing forward with him. Maya wasn't rattled. She'd been here before, and she had a plan. Still, that didn't make the days any easier. The department responded just as Terence expected. The union sent out a vague memo claiming full confidence in the officers named, adding that procedures were followed during a rapidly evolving situation. No mention of Terence by name, no acknowledgement of the lawsuit. Just a polished wall of silence. That Friday, Terence walked into the precinct for his afternoon shift. Nobody said a word. The stares weren't even subtle anymore. In the break room, a younger cop, someone Terence had trained during field duty, got up and left as soon as he walked in. He poured himself a cup of stale coffee, stared out the window for a minute, then returned to his desk. Just another day pretending things were normal. Later that week, things got louder. Local media picked up the lawsuit. First a small write-up in the Tribune, then a spot on the evening news. It wasn't the headline, but it ran during the second segment, just after the weather. They used a department headshot of Terence from 3 years ago, smiling in uniform. The voiceover told the story in brief, ending with a line that stuck. "Miles says the incident shows how racial bias can exist even within the ranks of law enforcement, and how silence only protects the system, not the people." The next day, national outlets started calling Maya's office. MSNBC, Reuters, even a podcast that covered law enforcement whistleblowers asked for an interview. Maya told him to wait. "Don't speak until we get the body cam footage. That's when you talk." Terence agreed. But Caleb didn't wait. On Monday morning, Simone called him from the school parking lot. "You need to talk to your son," she said. "What happened?" "There was a group of boys making jokes, calling him Cop Son, saying you were faking it for money. Caleb shoved one of them. Got sent to the office." Terence closed his eyes. "Is he suspended?" "No. They gave him a warning. But you should talk to him." That night, father and son sat together on the back porch. No phones, no distractions, just the dark sky and the creak of the wooden steps. "I know I shouldn't have pushed him," Caleb said. "But I got mad. He said you were lying." Terence sighed. "I don't care about the push. I care that you're carrying something you shouldn't have to." Caleb kicked a pebble. "Why would they say you're making it up? Because the truth makes them uncomfortable," Terence said. "It means they have to admit things are broken. That racism isn't just something we talk about. It's something people live through, even with a badge." Caleb looked up at him. "You ever wish you didn't become a cop?" Terence thought about it. Really thought. "No," he said finally. "I just wish the system valued who I am as much as the job I do." Caleb nodded slowly. "Me too." A few days later, Maya called again. "They've turned over partial footage. It's bad." "How bad?" Terence asked. "It shows everything. Guns drawn. You identifying yourself twice. Them cuffing you anyway. And then the supervisor shows up and tells them to back off. And they argue with him. We're releasing it." Terence exhaled. It was happening. The public would finally see it. He wasn't exaggerating. He wasn't trying to stir things up. He was simply telling the truth, and now the cameras were watching. The bodycam footage dropped on a Wednesday morning. Meyer's team released it alongside a written statement that framed the incident for exactly what it was: an unjustified escalation rooted in racial bias, carried out against a black sergeant by his own department. The video was clipped down to 3 minutes, enough to capture everything the public needed to see without distortion or spin. It began with shaky footage from Officer Evan Kessler's vest. You could hear the dispatcher's vague call. "Suspicious person sitting in a vehicle? No further description?" Then came the heavy boots on pavement, the immediate order. "Out of the car, now!" The camera caught Terrence's calm voice, clearly stating, "I'm Sergeant Miles, badge number 4138, off duty, heading home." No hesitation, no aggression. Then both officers moved in. Kessler drew his weapon. Brooke came around the passenger side, gun also in hand. You could hear the click of handcuffs and the sharp sound of Terrence's body being pressed against the SUV. In the background, someone shouted, "Dad!" Then silence. And when the supervisor arrived, the camera caught a brief, muffled exchange. Lieutenant Jensen saying, "That's Sergeant Miles. He's one of ours." Brooke replied, "Didn't know that." Kessler shrugged. The supervisor's voice tightened. "You never even asked?" By noon, the footage had been viewed over 100,000 times. By sundown, it had gone viral. Sashar Justice for Saged Miles started trending on Twitter and Instagram. People weren't just shocked. They were angry. This wasn't a civilian claiming abuse. This was a cop, a black man in uniform, treated like a criminal by his own brothers in blue. The comments flooded in. He told them who he was. They just didn't care. Imagine how they treat people without a badge. This is exactly what we mean when we say the system isn't broken. It's working how it was built. TV networks picked it up next. Meyer appeared on MSNBC that night. She was sharp, composed, focused. "This isn't about one traffic stop," she said. "This is about what happens when you exist in two identities the system cannot reconcile: black and in law enforcement. The moment Sergeant Miles was out of uniform, his badge didn't protect him. His record didn't matter. His humanity was ignored." Some tried to downplay it. A local Fraternal Order of Police representative gave an interview suggesting the officers were acting on instinct and that the situation was resolved without violence. But no one was buying it. Terrence, meanwhile, stayed quiet. Not because he didn't have something to say, but because the video already said it all. His voice, his calm, his restraint, that had become the story. And for the first time in weeks, people were finally listening. At the precinct, things shifted. The same officers who had ignored him days earlier now gave him wide berths. Some looked at the floor when he passed. Others watched him like he was radioactive. Only Detective Kevin Wu approached him in the hallway. "You good?" he asked. "I'm surviving," Terrence replied. "You did the right thing, man." Terrence nodded. "Not everyone thinks so." Kevin shrugged. "You didn't need everyone. Just the truth." That afternoon, an email came through from the chief's office. The department was launching an external review into the incident. The message was boilerplate. "We are committed to fairness, integrity, and accountability." But buried in the text was a critical detail. Both Kessler and Brooke were being placed on administrative leave. It wasn't discipline, but it was a start. Simone met Terrence at the front door that evening with a tight hug and a proud smile. "You've got people talking," she said. "That's not what I wanted," he said. "No, but maybe it's what was needed." Caleb ran into the living room with his phone in hand. "They're talking about you on YouTube, Dad. There's reaction videos and everything." Terrence chuckled. "I'm not watching that." But later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, he sat alone in the kitchen with his laptop. He opened one of the videos, just to see. It showed the footage again, then cut to a young black man in a hoodie, sitting in front of a webcam. "This is why we say it don't matter what job you got, what title you earned, what rules you followed," the man said. "If they see black first, that's all they need." Terence leaned back in his chair, the weight of it all pressing against him. The shame, the anger, the fear. It hadn't vanished, but something new had taken root. Validation. He hadn't imagined it. He wasn't being dramatic. And now, the world could see it too. Depositions were scheduled for the following month. The lawsuit was moving forward faster than anyone expected, partly due to the public pressure, partly because Maya Benton refused to let the system stall it out. Every delay tactic the department tried, she swatted down. Every vague excuse from the city attorney's office, she countered with documentation, timestamps, and evidence. "This isn't just a case," she told Terence. "This is precedent. If we win this clean, we make it harder for them to hide next time." The depositions took place in a law office downtown. Neutral ground, sterile decor, no badges, no uniforms. Just chairs, water pitchers, and sworn testimony under a court reporter's steady fingers. Terence sat across from Officer Daniel Brooke first. Brooke looked different without his uniform, smaller somehow. He avoided eye contact, answering questions like someone going through the motions. His attorney sat beside him, occasionally whispering reminders or nudging him when he hesitated. Maya was methodical. "You were responding to a call about a suspicious person. Is that correct?" "Yes." "Was there a description of the person?" "Not really, just someone in a car." "Was there a mention of a weapon?" "No." "Did you see Sergeant Miles commit any crime when you arrived?" "No." "Did Sergeant Miles resist your orders?" "No." "So why was your firearm drawn?" Brooke shifted in his seat. It was late. The situation felt off. Maya tilted her head. "What felt off?" He paused. The person wasn't responding right away. Terence sat perfectly still. He remembered clearly. He had responded the moment they gave an order. Twice. Identified himself both times. It was all on video. Brooke knew that. But Maya didn't press it yet. She wanted the contradiction to live on the record, undisturbed. Then came Officer Evan Kessler. Kessler was different. Confident, defensive, borderline smug. He answered quickly. Too quickly. "You believed you were dealing with a potential suspect?" Maya asked. "Yes." "And did you ask for ID before removing Sergeant Miles from the vehicle?" "No." He wasn't complying at first. Maya raised an eyebrow. "So you didn't ask for ID, and you didn't check his badge until after you handcuffed him?" "We were trained to act based on perceived threat." "And you perceived a threat from a man sitting calmly in his vehicle?" Kessler hesitated for the first time. "Look, it was dark. He looked nervous. Something didn't feel right." "Nervous?" "Yeah. Fidgety." Maya clicked her pen and pulled out a still frame from the bodycam footage. Terence, both hands on the wheel, staring forward. "Is this what nervous looks like to you, Officer Kessler?" Kessler didn't respond. She continued. "You knew this neighborhood, right?" "Yes." "You knew it was primarily black?" Kessler hesitated. "I didn't think about that." "Are you aware that Sergeant Miles lives there?" "I didn't know that at the time." "Had you seen him before?" Another pause. "Yes." "A few times. Then you knew who he was?" "I wasn't sure." "But you recognized his face?" Kessler's attorney leaned in. "Objection." "Asked and answered." Maya nodded. "Noted." She closed her folder. "Let the record show the officers acted with no suspect description, no weapons reported, no resistance from Sergeant Miles, and no probable cause for a stop, much less an arrest." The depositions ended. And for the first time in weeks, Terence felt something shift. This wasn't just whispers and glances anymore. These men were being held to their words, and those words were unraveling fast. After the session, Maya and Terence stood outside the office building, watching cars pass by in the late afternoon light. "You were right to keep calm that night," she said. "I didn't feel calm." "You looked it, and that's what's saving this case." Terence shook his head. "I shouldn't have to be perfect to be safe." "No, you shouldn't. But this is the ground we stand on. For now." They walked to the corner together before parting ways. Later that evening, Simone surprised Terence with takeout from his favorite Caribbean place. They sat at the kitchen table, boxes open, the smell of jerk chicken and plantains filling the air. "You think it's working?" she asked. "The case?" I don't know, he admitted. I think they're squirming. But squirming doesn't mean justice. Caleb walked in with his backpack, tossed it onto a chair, and joined them. I watched the depositions online, he said. They looked nervous. Terence smiled faintly. You shouldn't be watching that. Caleb shrugged. I wanted to see. I wanted to hear them try to lie. There was a beat of silence. Then Terence said, This won't fix everything, but it might change something. And for the first time, that didn't sound like false hope. It sounded like the truth. The courtroom was quiet. Not silent, just quiet in that particular way that only courtrooms can be. Nervous whispers, shuffled papers, and the low hum of tension that hovered like a weight in the air. Terence sat at the plaintiff's table in a charcoal grey suit. No badge, no uniform, just himself. His wife Simone sat directly behind him, calm and composed, with Caleb next to her in a pressed button-down shirt, hands folded neatly in his lap. It was his first time in court, and he hadn't said much that morning, just gave his dad a quick hug before they walked inside. The trial hadn't dragged. Maya kept it tight and deliberate. 5 days of testimony, witnesses, expert statements on profiling, and a forensic breakdown of the bodycam footage. She presented facts, not emotion. The facts, as she repeated in her closing statement, spoke loud enough on their own. The defendants acted with no reasonable suspicion, she told the jury. No probable cause, no regard for who this man was, where he was, or what he had already given to this city. They saw his skin, and in that moment, nothing else mattered. Not his badge, not his service, not his humanity. She stepped back from the jury rail and added, If a decorated officer can be treated this way, what chance does a civilian have? The defense had taken the usual route. Policy language, vague references to safety, and the assertion that the situation was fluid and complex. They called it a mistake. A moment of confusion. But they never once apologized. Now it was up to the jury. 7 women, 5 men, a mix of ages and backgrounds. No one Terence recognized. They'd watched the footage. They'd listened to his testimony. Now they were deciding if it all added up to more than just a bad night. The judge, an older black woman with a measured voice and steady gaze, called the court to order. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreman stood. We have, Your Honor. Terence inhaled slowly. In the matter of Miles versus the city and officers Kessler and Brooke, on the claim of unlawful detention and violation of civil rights under color of law, we find in favor of the plaintiff. The room was still. For a full second, no one reacted. Then Simone's hand found Terence's. He didn't move, didn't smile, just stared straight ahead, trying to hold everything in place. The judge continued. We further award damages in the amount of $250,000, with additional punitive damages of $50,000 assessed against each officer personally. Maya leaned over, whispered, That's a win. A big one, but Terence didn't hear her fully. His ears were ringing. It wasn't the money, it was the validation. Every second on that sidewalk, every glance from his neighbors, every day he sat in silence, wondering if he was the crazy one for thinking this had been more than a misunderstanding. It was all acknowledged now. Officially, legally, publicly. As the judge adjourned the court, reporters outside the courthouse scrambled for quotes. Maya handled the press, answering with clarity and restraint. We're pleased with the jury's decision. This was never about money. It was about truth, about making the unseen visible. Terence stayed inside for a while, let the crowd thin out, then walked out the side exit with Simone and Caleb. They drove home in near silence, the kind that felt less like absence and more like peace. That night, as he stood in the bathroom brushing his teeth, Terence caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror. He looked the same, but something in his posture had shifted. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt lighter. Later, while putting Caleb to bed, his son asked, Does this mean it's over? Terence thought about it. No, he said, but it means they didn't get away with it. Caleb nodded. I told my friends, the ones who didn't believe me. Terence smiled. What did they say? They said your video was all over TikTok. Even people from other schools saw it. Terence shook his head. That's not exactly what I was going for. But now they know who you are, Caleb added. The real you, that part stuck with him. People finally knew the real him. Not just another face on the news, not a suspect profile or a name buried in red tape. He was seen for what happened and who he was. And in a world where too many stories get buried, that meant something. The verdict brought headlines, praise, and a brief burst of attention from people who would soon move on to the next story. Terence knew how quickly these moments faded. He wasn't naive enough to believe one lawsuit could reshape an entire culture, or that a few thousand retweets meant the system had changed. But something inside him had. He no longer felt like he was walking around with a weight chained to his chest. The shame, the quiet rage. It hadn't disappeared, but it had shifted. It no longer owned him. And for the first time since that night on the sidewalk, he could look his neighbors in the eye without wondering what they thought. A week after the verdict, he submitted a formal request for reassignment, off the streets, off patrol. Not because he was afraid, but because he was done pretending things were normal. He wanted to work on internal policy, bias training, reform, the real work. The department didn't fight him on it. They didn't celebrate him either. He was still a name, they whispered, a man who'd broken the code of silence. Some called him brave, others called him a traitor. But either way, they all had to look at him now and remember. It happened. He proved it. And he didn't back down. One morning, Terence sat at his kitchen table with Simone, sipping coffee while the sun poured in through the blinds. The usual buzz of email alerts and group chats had quieted. Life was returning to something close to normal. Or maybe a new version of normal. Simone reached for his hand. "Proud of you," she said simply. He smiled, tired of hearing that. "You'll get used to it." They both laughed, quietly. But beneath the smile, she saw the exhaustion still lingering in his eyes, the way he now flinched when police sirens echoed in the distance, the way he paused before stepping out of the house in plain clothes. The case was over, but the aftershocks still came in waves. Later that afternoon, he visited the community center down the street. The director, Ms. Lorna Ellison, had invited him to speak to a group of local teens, mostly black boys, some of them already walking with suspicion burned into their skin. Word had gotten around about what happened to Terence. The kids were curious. Some didn't trust cops at all. Others didn't know what to think. He stood at the front of the room in jeans and a dark sweater. No badge, no uniform, just a man with a story. He told them about that night, the stop, the way his voice caught in his throat when his son yelled out, the silence afterward. But he also told them about standing up, about pushing through fear, about fighting without violence and holding your dignity in a world that tries to take it. One boy raised his hand. "Why didn't you fight them? Like, yell or swing or something." Terence paused. "Because I wanted to make it home. Because I knew if I gave them even one excuse, that night could have ended differently." Another boy asked, "But you're a cop. Shouldn't they have known?" "They should have," Terence said. "But to them, I wasn't a cop first. I was black first." The room went quiet. Then he said something he hadn't planned to. "I used to think the badge protected me. And it does. Sometimes. But that night showed me something important. No uniform can shield you from the biases people carry inside. The real protection comes from knowing who you are, and not letting anyone take that from you." After the talk, a few of the teens came up to shake his hand. One of them, maybe 16, said softly, "I didn't think any of y'all cared. But now I do." Terence nodded. "We do, and we've got work to do. All of us." That night, back home, he sat with Caleb on the porch steps again. The air was cool, the neighborhood quiet. "You still glad you went through with the lawsuit?" Caleb asked. Terence didn't answer right away. "I'm not glad it had to happen," he said. "But I'm glad I didn't stay quiet." Caleb nodded. "I told my teacher I want to be a lawyer." Terence looked over, surprised. "Yeah? Yeah. Like Miss Benton. She was cold." Terence laughed. "She was sharp. You'd be good at that." The two of them sat in silence for a moment, looking up at the stars. Terence didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man who had faced the system he helped hold up, and told it the truth. Not because he wanted revenge, but because his son saw him on that sidewalk. And he refused to let that be the end of the story. And if you're still watching, let this story be a reminder. Not every act of courage looks like a protest. Sometimes it looks like staying calm when you're afraid, filing the paperwork, showing up to court, telling your story even when you're not sure anyone will listen. If this meant something to you, subscribe to the channel. These stories matter, and they deserve to be heard.